Hello, I'm Joan Manson of Manson Fine Art. Thank you for joining me today in this pan pastel project, which is for a beginner, in creating this beautiful white iris bloom. This is the image after I drew it, and if you'd like to try and follow along, I'm sure yours will be just as beautiful, if not more so. These are the colors and the materials that I use, the tool applicators. They're purple and dairy light yellow and green and black and white. I use Derwent pastel pencils, just a few, to match the colors that I use from the pastel set. I use 7 by 10 inch Pastelmat paper from Clairefontaine. The color that I chose was wine. I did a tracing and transferred it to the paper. This is the original photograph that I used. I took it in my garden. This is my workspace. And now let's get started. Okay, I've transferred my image using white pan pastel and the line drawing onto the Pastelmat paper. I'm using chromium oxide green. I have the tint laid out, but I don't expect to use it. I'm using a finger applicator tool to work in between all of the petals. And I'm applying the chromium oxide shade. Now, of course, this is a sanded paper or like a sanded paper, so it does take a lot of application and a bit of pressure, not too much, to have the pastel cover the background paper. But I'm not that concerned about it covering the paper completely because I expect the paper to lend its own energy to the background. I'm just moving into time lapse, so this will move along a little more quickly for you. I have this paper taped down to an 8.5 11 size clipboard so that I can turn it around if I need to. Once in a while, when you're working on an image, you feel almost as though you're in an awkward position. Your hands are, at any rate, trying to work from the bottom up or get something going. So it's nice to be able to turn the image around and work with some more ease. Now I'm changing to the larger round applicator. Oh, it's an oval applicator, my apologies. Covering more territory, building up on top of the color that's already there. And you can probably do 20 to 25 layers of pastel on Pastelmat paper. Now I'm going to use the black to create shadow and define the broad leaves. There are beautiful broad leaves, 2 or 3 kinds actually, behind this iris bloom, aside from the plant itself. I'm moving real time right here so that you can see what I'm actually doing. And I'm going back to the pencil, or the finger applicator rather, so that I can get the darker parts around the petal placed in neatly. I will be working on those with white, but I'm not sure that it won't pick up the black pastel, so I'm being very careful. Now we're in time-lapse land. And it's at the point now where the background looks like I've really got to be wasting my time. But this is the building stage. This is the time where the concrete is being laid into the slabs and the wooden framework is going up. And this is the square edge applicator tool. I'm working across the edge and pretty much drawing with it. But you can see that the color of the paper, the wine color, is still showing through, and it really looks good on the leaves. It seems as though it's part of the color of the leaves. And it's fun to work with a toned paper because it lends a different texture to the work that you're doing. Its own color will come through whether you see it or not, and it will guide the colors that you lay down as well. When you're using a colored paper or a tinted paper, you can use it to create your darkest or your mid-tone to make the application of color simpler as well. Now I'm using the diary lined yellow and the chromium oxide green tint color rather, I'm sorry, and blending them to create a third yellowish green. There are, as I said, more than one kind of leaf back there. They're large, and I like the multiple colors. I also like that the brighter yellow is behind the broad green leaves, so it causes a bounce, a visual bounce, not a physical bounce. And we're in time-lapse land again. Just wiping that off. Remind, if you're not used to using the applicator tools, you just wipe them on a paper towel to get them clean. Over time on a rough surface, actually not too much time on a rough surface, the sponge will start to tear away and crumble. So you'll have to change them. But they do sell replacement covers for all the applicator tools. And when I use them on smooth paper, that really isn't an issue. It takes a very long time for me to use them, but I wanted to do this project on the Clairefontaine Pastelmat because of the amount of coverage you have to deal with, the amount of coverage you have trouble dealing with if you don't apply and apply, and to share with you just how much you can cover. I'm bringing the round edge to work on the petals. And yes, the background is only semi-defined because it was my intention that it be fuzzy, so that the broadleaves in the very front are more distinct, but what goes on behind those leaves is indistinct. I have to apply a lot of white to make the white hold. Still, I'm going to allow the wine color from the paper to show through and add to the shadow. And because the crest is in purple and yellow, that's going to work beautifully for contrast. The applicator I'm using is from Soft Pastels as well. The tip is replaceable, and it's not unlike an eyeshadow applicator that you can buy in the cosmetics store. To its benefit, it's about 6 or 7 inches long, which is much easier for me to handle. Handles like a pencil or a paintbrush. And I'm moving into time lapse so we can move through this more quickly. I'm paying a lot of attention to the edges and making sure that I have white there, because when you look closely at a flower petal, it appears as though there's a seam that runs along the outer edge. And in a white petal, it seems like there's a seriously white edge, and then alongside of it, a thread with darker shade, and then back to the white again. Just adding more white to the areas that need to be lighter, keeping the areas shaded that need to be shaded. And you can see as the petals get whiter and whiter, the background becomes clearer and clearer and set back. And if at any time during this video you'd like to follow up on more of my work, please do subscribe, and I'd appreciate a thumbs up. You can also click on the owl icon at the bottom right of the screen to subscribe. This is a Jane Davenport baton applicator tool. It's about 4.5 inches long. Again, because it's longer, it's easier for me to handle. When I first tried the pen pastels way back in 2008, I didn't really understand enough about them, and I ordered what was the pastel set, which was a set of tints, not the actual hues. And when I used them, I just was so unhappy because I couldn't build up with them. But I found a home for them and sent them off to live in New Jersey. And it was nearly a decade later before I tried them again. I studied more about them. I got a better idea, and I bought a starter set and used it and liked it. Then I didn't like it. Then I did like it. I had this little off and on romance going with pen pastels, and I gave them away. And I moved into doing just black and white. And then somehow I saw somebody working in white charcoal, and I thought, white pan pastel would be great for that. So I've done a series of, and often continue to do, white pan pastel on black paper drawings. And I really love them. I love the maturity that comes from them. And then I started building up my color. So I have probably most of the colors, including the metallic ones, the pearlized ones. But I tend to, whatever I'm doing, pull out a limited number of colors or use a limited palette of primary colors, or the Zorn palette, which is red ochre, yellow ochre, black and white. But because it doesn't perfectly duplicate uh, the the paints used by Andersorn, the flaky white doesn't really have yellow in it. It isn't lamp black, so there's no blue in it. So I've added ultramarine blue to the mix. And that works very nicely. I have a few pieces on YouTube showing me using the Zorn palette and the red, white, and blue palette, red, white, and blue, and yellow and black, the primary colors. And while I've been babbling, I've been working on the crest, which is what you call that lovely purple and yellow part in the center of the iris. Okay, now we're moving on to using the pastel pencils. And here I have the half a dozen or so pencils I'll be using, white and 2 shades of violet and purple, marigold yellow, yellow ochre, and a seal. And I'm putting in the fine detailing, the folds in the leaves, the little lines, the tiny shadows that fall between the petals and the crescent. You can also use colored pencils instead of pastel pencils if you don't have them. And probably the watercolor pencils as well. You don't have to add water. The pigments are beautiful. Many people use the pan pastels just for background. I like to do the whole thing, and I like as much as possible for the pan pastel to take center stage. If you can work a piece large enough, you won't have to use pencils at all, except for possibly drawing in whiskers on a bird, or whiskers on a cat, or teeny feathers on a bird. But the colors are very rich, and when you use them, you can feel how creamy they are. There are no binders added. It's almost pure pigment. The blacks are created, or the shades are created by adding black, and the tints are created by adding white. It's just dealing with the yellow, and then I'm bringing in the seal. Seal is an almost black. It's not as black as lamp black or carbon black. And that was the raw umber, adding in to make more shadow detail. Just all the fine detailings along the edge. There are lots of narrow white areas on the edges of these petals. And that's more raw umber coming through to add a little more contrast. And the seal for the darker shadows. And the shadows aren't large and glaring. They're actually just fine lines that are cast and distinguish the petals from each other. And I do blend them in. Okay. And now the iris bloom is complete. I hope you've enjoyed this demonstration. I hope this is a project you'll think about trying yourself. And again, if you like this, please give me a thumbs up and click on the little owl in the bottom right to subscribe to my channel.